Thanks for joining us today for It's Going to Cost What? Mitigating Large Loss Costs. I'm Sarah Chadwick, Marketing Director with CRC, and I will be your moderator today. I am pleased to introduce to you Tyler Katrana, Project Director with CRC. Tyler has been in the restoration and construction industry for more than 23 years and is no stranger to large losses. Tyler, take it away.
Thank you, Sarah. Appreciate it. Again, my name is Tyler Katrana. I'm Project Director with CRC. And today we wanted to talk a little bit about it's going to cost what? Mitigating large loss costs. We're going to be going over several items that we need to think about when we roll into a large loss or even a small loss, but we are going to be concentrating a little bit on the large loss and what costs are going to affect us overall. We're going to, what to expect in this, we're going to go over some mitigation costs initially, and that's going to include mobilization. It's probably appropriate right now with Hurricane Ian and the mobilization costs that are going to affect losses coming down there. What to expect on reconstruction costs. This has been a hot button issue for several months now as prices have increased and supply chains have become an issue. Then we'll go over some project timelines, what to expect, why certain timelines are taking longer than others, and what you can expect and how that may affect your claim, especially from a business interruption standpoint. And then the most important role, and probably what everybody's most interested in, is ways to reduce the overall claim cost. Some of them may affect it on a minor role. Some of them, we're going to look at some examples that I have towards the end of this on what may seriously impact the claim costs. And the biggest thing I want everybody to take away from this, and the goal of this, is to have you as owners, adjusters, or consultants to think globally on project timelines. And maybe there's a couple things that we can do a little bit better from a contractor standpoint, adjuster standpoint, consultant standpoint, keep everyone in checks and balances in order to reduce that claim time and reduce the costs. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and move right into our initial mitigation costs, and understand that mitigation can run a variety and a range of work. Mitigation can include different areas from water mitigation, fire mitigation, hazardous materials, anything along those lines. For this discussion, we're mostly concentrating on water and fire damage, mitigating those types of costs. Abatement, asbestos abatement, hazardous materials can affect this in a different way, and that may be another discussion at another time. Moving on to mobilization costs and what we're expecting for mobilization costs on large losses, and even in your local market, what we're seeing across the board. The three graphics that you see there expect more fuel charges, especially around catastrophic mobilization. That's happening right now. We just got off conference calls concerning that and down in Florida, and where large equipment is being mobilized and stationed, lay down yards and stuff like that. It will affect travel, hotel costs, and then delivery surcharges. Market conditions are going to increase across the board. The newest inflation numbers out as of September 1st are 8.3%. What does that mean? High is bad, low is good, but I really didn't understand that, so I had to look that up. And what it is the Bureau of Labor and Statistics takes basically a basket of consumer goods that Americans are buying on a regular basis, and they compare the cost of that basket. I don't know what the size of that basket is. I think that's probably a pertinent question, and what those products are, but what they do is take that aggregate and they compare it to the previous month. So from August to September, those products increased by 8.3%. Restoration and mitigation contractors are not immune to any of that or anything that we buy. And so therefore, we need to increase costs and ultimately to cover any of our operating costs and purchasing. One of the biggest costs that remediation companies may face, and what you may have experienced even in your personal life, is the cost of fleet vehicles or general trucking costs. As we come out of the pandemic, stock fleet inventory has been low. Regular trucks, personal cars, if you've been in the market, either new or used, these costs have risen significantly, and I'm sure you've experienced that. So that, again, translates down to what we are seeing as far as a market that's incurred costs that your contractor has to bear. Additionally, for companies that perform work across the country, and again, for a catastrophic event, we have significant fuel surcharges. and the price of specifically diesel and other fuels that run power generation and large trucking costs have not come down significantly to some of the other price costs. It is a commodity, so it does fluctuate somewhat. But this comes into play where when we are trucking and moving this equipment down, we even have somewhat of an issue with personnel for delivery, providing fuel to the sites, as well as trucking costs in general. There's been a tightening of the labor market in that respect. And so even getting those deliveries made becomes a cost basis for concern. Again, mobilization costs, expect to pay them. Some of these catastrophic costs, they are a percentage of your loss, and some contractors are doing a percentage or straight across the board turned in. One item I will say, especially for Hurricane Ian and large generation costs or delivery costs, as adjusters, you should be aware that sometimes when they're delivering generators, they charge that delivery fee, and that's single delivery fee. You should review that cost. Sometimes what we find some generation companies are doing is charging every generator that's on that truck, because they stack many of them. They're giving everybody several $1,000s charge for delivery rather than splitting it between the 3 that are being delivered. So one thing to keep an eye out for, and something that you may be able to save some money on, and having a discussion with your contractor and supplier and making sure they're not overcharging on a delivery charge in a circumstance like this. Heavy equipment and rental costs are obviously going up. I did a brief example, and I took a 35 and 90 kilowatt generator. The price in 2021 was approximately $622 per week, and it's raised to $785 roughly now, representing a rental cost increase of approximately 26%, excuse me. Keep in mind on rental and generation costs, when you are dropping a large generator, that does not include your hookup, labor costs, fuel delivery. Sometimes these generators are taking fuel every 24 hours if you're on a heavy load for buildings. So all of that is plus on top of any type of rental and power generation. We're looking at a lot of our cost increases or mitigation and equipment increases. For the most part, what we use in mitigation as far as low grain refrigerant, dehumidification equipment, fans, axials, or conventional fans, the equipment costs have gone up by lower percentages. Most companies do own their own equipment, and that can be something that is looked at as a project starts and making sure it's of market rate. But since we do own that equipment, we haven't seen a huge cost increase. Those are usually done on a yearly scale, and that hasn't changed all that much. Now let's get into our next slide is reconstruction costs. And when we get into reconstruction costs, this is a major concern for probably everyone across the board. But there's a skilled labor shortage across the construction industry that probably everyone is starting to hear quite a bit more of, especially in the MEP's market. That's mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. Those seem to be the highest and most in-demand fields that we have a shortage of, and prices are increasing significantly in those areas. In the second half of 2022, we may see, and coming into fall here, this long-term probably really starting to take its toll as inflation, federal spending, aging workforce, and persistent shortages. The hurricane will not help this out at all, drive up costs, wages, and overall price of building anything in the United States is going to increase. I did a little bit of research on this, wanting to hear what industries have to say concerning the labor shortage. And I'll quote a few items that I researched here. And from the National Electrical Contractors Association, they were quoted as saying that 7,000 electricians join the field each year, but 10,000 retire. So as the job openings continue to increase without new laborers to fill them in, the situation could impact every element of home services, wait times, work quality, and cost. We do bid out and we perform electrical work. Most contractors do and have to get that done on your project. That presents a timeline issue sometimes, availability of these people, and obviously the cost is going up. Historically, if you are an adjuster or you're familiar with Xactimate and the program that we write in, or a lot of insurance claims are written in, I have found that mechanical, electrical, and plumbing line items may not be captured correctly, and we have to then put in a line item individually or turn in incurred costs as the program isn't quite keeping up with the market conditions. Another quote that we had was from the National Association of Home Builders, and they were quoted as saying, the median age of a construction worker right now is more than 40 years old. The longer term problem is who's going to be the next generation of construction workers. Now, this is going to be a national problem and has become and started to be a national problem for skilled trades as we're just losing so much more in the market. Expect those skilled trades, skilled labor shortage to intensify across the markets. And unfortunately, until we make a shift in probably thinking and get more kids involved, it's going to continue to exacerbate the problem throughout the country. We're seeing material increases anywhere from 8 to 35%. You go, wow, what is it, 8 or 35%? It's a commodities market. It's difficult to just pin down. It changes, if not a weekly or a monthly basis. We've seen that. Most of it has been on the upswing, not down. So that's been difficult to track, but that is going to affect your timelines on when you bid a project, when you actually start. If it's months in advance, and we'll get into that a little bit later on project timelines, that's going to affect a cost for construction. As the lower portion, we may not realize gains or losses in material for several months until existing product clears and is restocked. A lot of suppliers are not going to change their pricing, even though right now the market's come down. What they're buying may be a little bit cheaper. It may have come down. However, the stock that they already had and bought, they're still going to keep that price high until that stock clears, and then they can realize the gain or loss of what they've purchased. That's going to affect the market and what we buy and what we put into our projects. Obviously, people are somewhat hearing the recessionary pressures coming down. The problem is even though recessionary pressures may come in, inflation is counteracting that as far as the products are concerned. And so we don't expect a product decline for some time. Next slide. For those of you familiar with how we write, I wanted to put in something that was a direct comparative of cost. And this was from February to June. This is an actual job site in San Bernardino, California. And February, I didn't change anything besides what went up in price, or I had to input in price. If you look at that graphic and notice what's highlighted there, the heating, vent, and air conditioning was the main product that went up. That has to do with rooftop units, supply chain issues, and skilled trades and labor again. It went from $299,000 to $339,000, so approximately a 12% rise in cost in just 6 months. Again, we'll get into how this is going to affect this claim overall on a project timeline, and could affect from what the carrier has to pay. So how do we truncate that? But we do see some different rises, some of them very minor, some of them major, but overall with the inflation numbers that we see, and then correlating to some construction costs, either way, construction costs are going up, usually above 10% and anywhere from 10 to 25%. So if we go to project timelines and we start to look at what we need to have material-wise to perform these jobs, some of the top 3 items that we're noticing on long lead times are HVAC equipment, roofing materials, and windows and doors. We have to look at it as each project as being unique, and they may have a high likelihood of being damaged in certain circumstances. The hurricane, as a prime example, with large loss, those 3 items have a significant probability of being damaged, and therefore they already have pressures of supply. It's going to increase now with this storm and other named storms coming out. I do have an example of that HVAC equipment. What we just looked at the graphic above for the job in San Bernardino, we're complete with that project ostensibly, except for the HVAC equipment. So we have demobilized from the job, and once those pieces of equipment come in, we'll have to remobilize to put those in. Keep in mind that may involve putting a business back into service, your business interruption of the claim, or you may have to look at alternates to keep your business up and running. In this circumstance, the discussion was with temporary cooling being brought into the building, which is a significant cost compared to the business actually being shut down for a period of time while new HVAC systems are in. So it's ancillary issues that come about with non-availability of these products. So keep in mind, long lead time items, you need to order them soon as that project starts, because they could be months out. And that's going to significantly increase the cost of the claim. And again, potential business interruption, increasing those costs with the products involved. A fourth item that isn't up on the graphic, but we do see some long lead time items for you business owners, multifamily, HOAs, anything like that is, or you personally, is appliances. There's been some backlog on appliances with supply chains. We found that some suppliers are less affected than others, but anything really coming overseas, we see some issues and backlogs of some specific equipment. So project submittals, if you can value engineer your project, if you have a specific item that is requested, but you can put an item that is more available, work with your contractor on getting those value engineered. Perhaps you can use something else that is much more available than what is initially presented. So keep that in mind on a value engineering standpoint. All right, now we get into the a little less or a little more abstract items, but they play a significant role in what we do and how we move the project forward. And that is design and municipality displays. And we're going to get into architectural engineering plans and some examples a little bit in just a few slides. But understand that when a project is going to require architectural and engineering, then when we submit to the cities are taking anywhere, whether it was COVID related or before, we typically see 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks on an initial project design review. And when that review comes back, the municipality may have some corrective notes that need to be taken care of. Then once those corrective notes are done, that could be another week or two from your engineer or architect. That is resubmitted, and that may take another 2 to 3 weeks for them to review again. That does not guarantee that they won't have another note that they maybe missed the first time. I'm going to hold up an example, and if you can see somewhat that example, those red lines on this set of plans, those are the notes from a municipality. We got those at the beginning of the week. Those little red bubbles took them 6 weeks to give us that information back. That's going back to an engineer. He's got about a week probably to get all his corrective notes put in, possibly a little less, and then we'll resubmit. Hopefully it will not take 6 more weeks to get a review for the permit to be pulled. So when everybody asks us, hey, what schedule is this going to take? How long is this going to take? We tell them, as soon as we have the permit, we'll give you the accurate schedule of work. And I know that's frustrating for everyone, but you can communicate that to your clients as far as what's going on, or have the contractor help communicate that and set the expectation for everyone up front. Forensic report versus construction documents. For adjusters and consultants out there, I know on large losses, we have a forensic engineering report that comes out that helps establish what the cause was, help you establish coverages, subrogation issues, anything like that. However, a forensic engineering report is not a construction document to us. In certain circumstances, we have had forensic engineers on the back of the report say, hey, this is the design, or this is the fix. That is outstanding. That's great. That keeps us moving right along. We can then take that to the building department and kind of plead that case that let's get this done. Let's get this moving. Here's the design. Here's exactly what we're going to do. It's usually on minor structural issues or anything like that, not a full set of construction documents. But keep in mind, just because you had an engineer out, that is not, I've got that sometimes, a little less experienced adjusters. I ask, well, hey, do we have some engineering, anything going on? And they say, well, sure, I've had the engineer out, and I get handed a forensic report. That is not construction documents. That does not get me what we need for constructability, for construction. Again, review your timelines with your customers, review timelines with your contractor, and we'll be able to kind of fill you in on what specific municipalities may be taking longer time or shorter time, and try to plan accordingly and set that expectation. All right, so how do we reduce overall claim costs? This is what everybody wants to hear. Speed, and this is going to concentrate on a little bit of knowing the loss and speeding that process along by knowing that loss. The first graphic we've come up with really is during mitigation, know your building assemblies to see if it's practical to dry in place or more practical to remove. The graphic that's up is a current project on a multi-level hotel loss. It is open for business, so we have to think of life safety issues throughout the project. If you notice on the lower section, that is a fire assembly for a hallway. This did require a permit. The first layer of drywall had wallpaper on it. And then, as you can see, there was actually a hat channel, if you can tell in the graphic. It's a black and white, so it's tough to tell, but there's 3/4 inch hat channel for sound attenuation. And then another drywall fire assembly layer below that. And then the actual wall assembly is a 2x6 framing. It is wood framing, actually, that has additional sound attenuation or insulation bats in it. In this particular instance, with the vinyl wallpaper that was on the walls, the fire assembly that was there with hat channel and an air gap in between with that hat channel, it was more practical to remove the first layer of drywall and then try to dry the second, instead of trying to dry in place. From a life safety standpoint, we didn't want a bunch of equipment there for long periods of time while you try to dry multiple layers of assembly. Because there was individuals walking in there, it was still an active hotel site. We need to make sure we keep those hallways clear. So in those instances, talk to your customers, clients, find out what their best needs are, what their risk aversion is, and what you may have to do. And that may affect the timeline that you have in moving that forward, what makes sense. And ultimately, we're looking at this as knowing your loss and what's practical or not, right? If we don't have to remove it, we can dry it in place, then we're going to save construction time and costs. And we certainly will try to do that in each appropriate circumstance, but it has to be the right circumstance. And we could have a whole another webinar on water classes, categories, different classifications of when we remove or when we don't, and we can certainly do that at another time. Moving on, speeding the process along by knowing your loss, when it's practical to go to competitive bid and when it's not. Sometimes we run across a situation where everybody wants a competitive bid and thinking that that's going to save time or money. And specifically, I had just came off a project in Seattle. We met five different contractors were invited out for a request for proposal. We all met on site. I would say were qualified. One was not. As we walked the job site, this was a 12,000 square foot office complex that was vandalized. Wires were pulled out across the building. There was plumbing pulled out, fire wire, and it was all in different areas. It was really kind of Swiss cheesed what we were looking at. And what I'll come down is when we were invited out to look at this project, there was not a design already complete. And when I say a design from electrical, mechanical, or plumbing standpoint, and HVAC had been removed, plumbing had been removed. So we needed to know what HVAC units were going to be replaced, what they were going to be replaced with. So you couldn't do this job without a permit, without a design, and without specifications being applied for in the city of Seattle. It was going to require design regardless from an MEP, a qualified MEP, architect, or engineer, to give you all the loads and what this building was going to take to be refurbished. If we go to the next slide, and this again a little bit technical for our adjusters and consultants out there. This was the first sheet of what we had for that loss. Now, if you look at the total down there, it says $99,653.94. This job in practicality with walking around and what was missing on HVAC in it, it's about $1.5 million job. But as we all showed up, this is what we received. This is just the carpet. We have carpet, different things. These are just the things that the adjuster could walk around and look at. So from $1.5 million job, we have just a scope that has $99,000 there. If we go to the next slide, this is what was given as the rest of the job. And we see all that line on the right, and it says paid when incurred, paid when incurred, paid when incurred. Because there was no design available, we can't pull a permit for the job. All he's saying is, hey, you know what, turn in your MEP contractors invoices at the end. All 5 of us contractors walked that 12,000 square foot building for about 10 minutes, all got together and said, listen, you have some choices here. And we went back down and talked to the adjuster and or consultant. And we told them, I said, you're going to have to pay some money up front. Either you have a couple of choices. Either pay one of us to get a design team in or along with a design team to come up with a proper scope as far as what is all called out and what's being replaced. And then that can be sent out for bid for other contractors with pricing blanked out if you want to still bid this out. Or frankly, go ahead and get your design team involved, get the scope out yourself, talk to your carrier, make sure you get a design team, get them out there, put that scope together, and then send it all out to us. Or the third choice was just hire the qualified contractor. 4 or 5 of us are qualified to do the job overall, get them out there, start it. We'll start working through the entire process and go. Since we're going to be turning in basically $1,400,000 of paid when incurred expenses, is it really appropriate to necessarily bid the job? Now, there's ancillary factors out there that may be required. I understand that, but it could be a discussion of what you have. When we received this and went up to take a look at this job, it had already been 4 weeks since the loss happened. So in my estimation, we've lost 4 weeks of availability of design and getting a proper scope made when nobody really could put a proper scope together to even move the process along. And that's what we're starting to get. And I would like you to start seeing is as we miss more and more timeline, we've already established how much pricing has gone up and it will continue to go up. Those percentages and timelines comparative to the project are going to increase your costs continually. And I want everybody to look at that from a standpoint of time is money. Okay, that's what we're discussing along of. All right, finally, this is kind of the biggest example. We're going to try and put some numbers to the entire process, and that's speeding the process along. Know your loss again. Know when an architect and engineer are going to be required to move a claim forward. Ask your qualified contractor, ask the municipality. I'm going to give you an example that happened this July. I went out to walk approximately $4 million loss in Nashville, Tennessee. A fire had taken place in April of this year. It was a 1973 multifamily building. Again, built in 1973. One building was going to be a scrape. The secondary building had damages, so a secondary building was damaged but needed to be remediated. From April to July, when we were asked to come out, we had 2 other national contractors and myself come out to take a look at this project. We received a project notebook written in Xactimate of like, kind, and quality that the consultant and adjuster had written in that previous 3 months. They handed that all out, said, can you guys please bid this off of this scope of work? No problem, we can certainly do that. However, the first question we all were going to ask on site, and we did, and there was no reason to really walk the rest of the project from that standpoint, was where's our actual construction documents? Where's the architect, engineering, structural engineering, stormwater, wastewater prevention, civil engineering, and fire plan? There was no answer to that. Nothing had been designed, nothing had been looked at. So we were starting from a standpoint of here's a scope of work. We can certainly provide that, but that has no bearing on what is actually going to be produced. If we look at that from that standpoint, even if they started in July and went ahead and engaged an architect and engineer to provide construction documents, right now architects and engineers for a full set of construction documents can take anywhere from 1 to 3 months. We're seeing somewhere in between 1.5, 2 months, 3 months to provide those documents. From July all the way to September here, they still do not have construction documents. I don't even know if they've started construction documents, but you're missing all that time. If we start equating that time to dollar value of, let's even take 12% of what I did out in San Bernardino from February to June, and we equate it to this project and do the multiplier by $4 million, we're now equating that to about $480,000 of potential money going out the door for the claim. Now, that may not be that total amount. That's going to be a little bit tougher to qualify. But I would say I could say probably with confidence, 204, probably around $250,000 is true cost of waiting that long. So let's flash back. If we took that example and the day, or let's say a couple of weeks after that fire took place, subrogations come through, that consultant or adjuster starts to write that exactimate scope that they need for like, kind, and quality. We understand that. They're going to produce that. But in the meantime, within a week or so of that loss, they recognize we need architectural engineering full set of drawings. And they started that in April. How much time would that have saved, and therefore equating to the dollars of the scope of the claim? In that whole time that we came out 3 months later, if they were able to hand us a full set of construction documents, the buildable set, what's actually going to take place and what we have to build to get a permit, to move it through the municipality and build it to current code and ordinance, all that is all covered. What else would that have answered for the adjuster? That needs to be answered anyways. They produced their scope of like, kind, and quality. Now you have construction documents that can be bid. Whether they equate what's going to be code and ordinance or ordinance and law to that claim, they answer that. They have a set of construction documents that everybody is going to bid on equally. So there shouldn't be that much of a change. We as contractors, we already know what type of equipment's going to be used, HVAC systems, we have specifications, so we can bid that out accurately for the claim as well. It solves so many problems. And then in the end, if this thing still is moving along and we're still waiting for architect and engineering, when we get to the municipality, it's going to take another 2 to 3 weeks for review. They're going to kick it back on a sub project that size. I guarantee they're going to have some notes. Then it gets resubmitted, another couple of weeks there. Again, it exacerbates the problem. So thinking globally on all of this, and that comes into play. I know we have some ownership groups, multifamily project management groups. When you see architects and engineers, at these events, A&D, CAI, and they have a booth, a lot of times everybody kind of goes, I don't necessarily need to know this architect. Get to know an architect or an engineer, because when the worst happens to your property, they are somebody that you're going to need to engage. Again, the insurance, and as insurance adjusters, when you walk onto a loss and it's a structural loss, help the client understand, because they need to hire them, obviously, to get this stuff done. Encourage them to get an architect or an engineer involved to save that project timeline. Time is money. And as we can see what's happened in the market even lately, that could be significant. $280,000 in savings on a claim just because of a few decisions being made up front, or letting our customers know, hey, we need to engage somebody. That's significant savings for a claim. So think globally about what you're getting into on a project. If you don't know, and you don't know if it needs an architect, engineer, the municipalities have on their websites what is going to be required, what permit's going to be required. And ultimately, if they need to look at it, they want to see code review. More and more municipalities are becoming more strict on the documentation they would like to review on existing buildings. And that's going to affect the timelines and costs. And we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars on large loss projects in delay costs. So with that, we'll recap first. Thank you. So what to expect mitigation costs? They are going up, some of it less than others, on a lot of general equipment that we use. We're not seeing huge raises in that because of how each mitigation contractor reacts, but you'll have to look at those national price sheets and see if they equate to what is being done in other areas. What to expect on reconstruction costs? Again, it's going up. It may fluctuate on a commodities market, especially as the market moves forward. We have some unknowns there, but keep in mind availability of construction materials. and what happens with those. What to expect project timelines. Keep in mind municipality delays. They have been exacerbated by COVID. For a lot of municipalities have just gone to a contactless system, which hasn't quite been figured out. That's extending project timelines. Then long lead time items from a supply chain issue have been on the increase. Some of that is starting to loosen up a little bit, but still expect that to cause some issues on your project. Know when you're lost. Know when to engage that architect and engineer. Save a lot of time on your project, on these large loss projects, structural damage, by knowing when to engage an architect engineer. If you don't know, ask. For our ownership groups, get to know somebody that you like, because you may be the one engaging them. So get to know them. They're cool guys and gals. Get to know them when you're at your next event. Maybe have one in your back pocket. That applies for even your engineers and consultants. Who do you like to use? If you can't, obviously we may do the same thing with engineers or excuse me, contractors, abatement. It's part of the claim. This is always going to be part of the claim. Start it off as part of the claim when the claim is processed. Start it as soon as you can, and that'll save a lot of project timeline and money, as we've seen. Know your building assemblies when it's practical to dry in place or remove. Get to know that a little bit better, the process of drying, or what's best for life safety and reconstruction. And then sometimes, and every once in a while, know when the project's going to be put out for bid. Sometimes it's practical, sometimes it's not. If it's direct cost, and we're just everybody's turning in direct costs just to get it moving. But other than that, I think that covers most of what we want to talk about. Sarah, if you want to open it up for questions and answers.
Thanks, Tyler. Yep, we'll go ahead and open it to questions. We do have a few in the Q&A, but if you've thought of any since, please go ahead and add them. But I'll start with a couple that we received during registration first. Tyler, what's the best or most efficient way to set the reserve for a large loss mitigation project?
That is a great question. So to our adjusters and consultants out there, the short answer that we typically use is, or I use, is a square foot price. You say, well, how do you equate that? How do you get there? Start doing it. I encourage you as an architect, or excuse me, and as an adjuster or a consultant, start asking all your colleagues, yourself, and look back on any of your projects, if it's mitigation only, and know what your square footage of that project is, and then start dividing that by your cost of what you actually paid. In a month or two, you're going to have some analytic data that is going to give you, hey, I've been paying around $13 in this area, $13 a square foot for mitigation, or this, that, and the other. There's a lot of factors that go into this, but when we're setting ROMs, we usually can narrow that down, believe it or not, and give them a pretty good ROM initially. That includes construction costs. We'll do the same thing to send out a scope letter to say, hey, this is what this rough order of magnitude is going to be on your loss. The main thing is to keep in mind, hey, you don't want to be low, then you're going back and back again if you publish that. So, we'd rather be a little bit higher than lower. In a hurricane situation, we have to add certain things. So we'll add a few dollars back onto what I've already known, or what we know as specific cost from that data, and start adding dollars to it. Likewise, if it's economy of scale, a large building, maybe we take some off. So a square foot price is probably the easiest way to go. And every time I get onto a loss, I always ask first thing, hey, we're gonna figure out what the square footage is, and that way I can give you something with some empirical data that we've had before. So square foot, try that. Start working out, getting some data for yourself, and you'll zero in on some numbers, and then understand what you may have to come up or down in specific circumstances.
Okay, thank you. This one says, since COVID, what is the inflation percent to perform repairs this year versus 2022? But they may have meant 2021 or 2020.
Good question. I would have to do a little more research, I think, on that to give an exact example. Again, I think we're seeing anywhere from 12 to 30%. Again, that's a pretty broad range, and it depends on your project itself. Again, heavy mechanical, electrical, plumbing projects are are probably going to be a greater increase in cost than just general drywall repair damage, your more superficial repair. So that's going to fluctuate a little bit, but I would generally say, you could probably land that in the middle somewhere and say probably around 20%, high teens, 20% from pre-COVID right now.
Can we expect costs to come down in the coming months and years?
Good. Okay, another good question, right? So we have this conundrum where we might have what they call stagflation, where prices remain high on an inflationary side, but we're actually in recession. Typically in stagflation circumstances, and I'm not an economist, but I stayed at a Holiday Inn last night. But if it gets into a heavier recession and obviously supply demand starts to wane, then we could, typically see some prices coming down, especially on a commodity market. As far as labor, I don't think you're going to see a labor. You're not overall labor I don't believe is going to come down that much. Once that cat's out of the bag, it's not going back in. It's and especially we think of skilled labor shortages, those guys are demanding higher and higher prices, and I don't believe that's really going to come down.
Okay, the next two kind of go back to your slide about design and municipalities delays. So the first one is, where did you get your averages for design and municipality delays?
That's practical experience. When we turn in for, again, I think I gave the example and I showed the sheet that took 6 weeks to get a review back on a municipality in Denver, in the Denver area. We typically see on some simple ones about a 2-week average for a review for design. And that can vary. We do have some over the counter. If it's a very simple project, we have that engineering, let's say from a forensic engineer, and he did that design. We can do what's called over the counter, and we try to push those through. But a lot of municipalities, again, they have qualifiers of what is an over the counter permit that can be pulled and what requires a full review. So each municipality is going to be different. Overall, we see right now, probably averaging at least in Colorado here, we're averaging around 2 weeks of a site review. Again, this one was an outlier here. Again, took 6 weeks for a review. So I can't give you a 100% average, but I would say when I put up that graphic, 2 to 3 weeks on a review, that's taking some of these longer experiences weighted with the shorter experience.
Okay. And then the next one is, can you touch on pre-construction meetings with the city?
Sure, I love them. Some municipalities don't allow them anymore or will not have them. Some you can pay them, and others are magnanimous enough to let us have somebody out and do a pre-con meeting with a building inspector and talking to them as far as what they need to see. And that especially goes along the lines of code and ordinance or ordinance and law. And them saying, hey, well, I'm going to be looking specifically for this. A lot of these inspectors, again, you have several different ones, but the overall building inspector that comes out, you're going to have separate building inspectors for electric, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and then you have the building inspector themselves more for structure. So it depends on what your project is heavy on and who you request. I'll be honest with you, they have not been doing since COVID. We have seen a drastic reduction in pre-construction availability for building inspectors. They just are not coming out and doing it.
Okay. And then I guess I'll do a last call for questions. So I'll ask one more. If you have any, please put them in the chat. Otherwise, this will be the last one. Can you touch on some of the areas or general rules as to when or certain types of damages as to when an architect and or an engineer needs to be involved?
When we see any type of major structural damage, that should be your first, obviously first kickoff, that we're going to need some type of structural review. And once that kicks off, kicks it off to a permitted job as well. So again, there's a lot of rabbit holes here where we could say, hey, what is this cause? What is this not? But anytime we have a structural issue, then we're going to get at least an engineer, structural engineer involved. Now that that can kick off another issue as far as the municipality is concerned, is we turn in something with structural engineering. That is when, as we were talking previously, the municipality may then, and it's becoming more common, come back to you and say, well, we want a code review of the building itself. And that, we're going to jump into something else as far as adjusters and consultants are concerned, and severe structural damage has nothing to do with that. It just has to do with, they may need a cover sheet that shows enumeration, shows the municipality I'm talking about may need or request, again, just a IBC, how we're following the engineering that's being done. And again, a code review saying, hey, this doesn't apply. And many times your architect or engineer involved, especially engineer involved, they may be able to say on the notes, we kind of request it sometimes, is this does not, this is only applied to this section of the building. This is all we're looking at. This is all we're doing. All the rest of the building is not applicable. If you can have that type of note in your engineering plan, then it kind of forces the county that they can't look at everything else. It limits what they are going to look at, and it greases the wheels of commerce on getting that through the municipality.
All right. That's going to wrap up our Q&A session. Huge thank you to Tyler for sharing his expertise with us today. As we wrap up, I have a few notes for you guys. Tyler's contact information is on the slide. If you'd like to reach out to him directly with additional questions, feel free. For information about our services, please visit commercialrestoration.com. Thank you again for joining us today. This concludes our webinar, and we hope you have a great rest of your week. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.